Hello, YouTubers. Welcome again to another session where Ricardo and I are going to continue building end-to-end feature to delete social media posts from a decentralized open source social media platform that we call Taarafo. In the last session with Ricardo, we worked on finalizing a delete post by ID. So we basically send the post ID, you know, a controller will hand over the ID to a foundation service. Foundation service will go find out whether that post actually does exist in the database, and then it tries to delete it. But that's only the back end side of it, right? That's the back end side of it. Now we want to develop the front end side of it. But before we jump into that one, let me just put a roadmap here so people can kind of follow with us and understand what we're really up to here today. And Ricardo, I think I shared this one with you before, but I'm gonna do it again so that people just get an understanding of what we're talking about here. Let me focus here, and then let's just go and say, okay, so what did Ricardo and I do so far? We basically went and said, okay, let's run a migration. Let's integrate with the database. So this is my database, and then here's a storage broker, right? And we had a foundation service talking to that broker. So this is my service, foundation service, like this. And then out of that foundation service, we had an API endpoint. That's what we did yesterday, right, Ricardo? So that's a controller,
Yep.
right, that basically talked to this. So this whole realm that we have in here, this is our core API. That's our Taarafo core API. It's an API endpoint that basically allows, I guess it's more descriptive if I put it this way. So at the edge of the API, we have a storage broker that's integrating with the outside world, and at the other edge, you have a controller that's being exposed, and this middle layer here is protected, from any foreign or non-local models. Okay. So this part is done. I'm gonna go here and say this is Taarafo Core API. Okay, perfect. Now, what we're gonna do today, and let me mark those as done because we already did the data migration. These are four different deliverables, right? The first one is to create the model and the migration. The second one is to go and say, I want to build a method on the broker that would allow me to delete and retrieve a post by an ID. This is here the foundation service that does all the validation, processing, and integration, and then the controller that translates all of these exceptions, all of these responses from localized models into an HTTP verb. It's a 200 or 400 or 500, whatever the case may be. Now, let's jump into the next realm. The next realm here is very similar because it's standardized software, right? It's following very specific rules. This entire API that we just built becomes an external dependency to that next component that we're building here. So the exact same model technically, this is instead of a storage broker, it's going to be an API broker, right? So again, something that's sitting at the edge of the system that's communicating with our RESTful controller, right? So that's one. And then you have a foundation service in here. And then the architecture starts to change a little bit from here. So from your foundation service, we need something that's called view service. This view service basically picks up your API localized models and turns them into models that the UI cares about, right? So sometimes the UI doesn't really want to display everything. Like for example, if you're working with a UI component, right? The UI component doesn't care about your audit fields like created date, updated date, created by, updated by. It doesn't really care about that, especially if you're creating a post, right? In our
Yep.
case here, it's even simpler because our component, all that it's really doing, our view service, is getting just an ID. So all the UI component has to do is just send us an ID. It doesn't really care, like we are returning an entire post as a response, but the UI itself doesn't really care much about that, right? So that's basically the case that we have here. So let's just go back here real quick and let's just continue that. So you have a view service, and then at the edge of this guy, so this view service plays the role of a controller basically in the previous model. But check this out, it gets a little bit more interesting here. This is where Blazor comes in. And this is where we go here, and this is of course the Taarafo portal or web, right? This is the web component. So we have in here a component, right? And this component will be placed within a page. So there's a bigger thing in here that's called a page like this. And this page is where the routes are defined and all that, right? So check this out. The component calls both the view service, which is the data realm, and it calls something called base component. It could be one to many, one to many. So one component to many base components, and the same thing in here. Now check this out. A base here is just like a broker. So a base component and a broker is exactly the same idea, right? And a component and a foundation service is exactly the same idea. And a controller and a page is exactly the same idea. Do you see it now? See the picture now? So these brokers here are basically the things that deal with external dependencies, right? So there's a broker and there's a broker, right? Because these are two different systems. Now this is a part of this larger system that we call Taarafo Web that lives in here. Let me put that a little bit like this, and let me pull that back to the middle here, because that basically is telling you I'm exposing this to the outside world, right? So here you go. So this is this guy. And then the same thing here. This guy sits on the corner here. Why? These base components' main responsibilities is to integrate with external UI components. So it's basically abstracts away. I'm going to put that in here. Like when you're trying to use a Sync Fusion library, or you're trying to
Yeah.
use, and I'm going to mark those as red. That basically means this guy is outside of my realm, right? Just like the database. So this is our architecture here. Our architecture basically is to go and say, this is my components. These are the stuff that I'm working on, and we're gonna start building that API broker right here. It's gonna be very simple and very straightforward. All we have to do is to basically build an integration point where we can call the API, and basically send it an ID and receive back a response. That's all, and that's it. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
let's start. These are the tasks that we have. We have this task, this task, this task, this task, this task, and I think this task is going to be a part of what Mehdi is working on in terms of render all, retrieving all the posts, so we can actually delete it. We'll see if we can get through with that one. So that's basically the architecture. Do you have any questions about any of that?
So,
Hmm.
so basically, we're kind of doing the same thing. They're just a bit different in terms of the naming convention, and I'm guessing for the components, they're divided by two, which is pages, which could have
Yeah.
multiple components,
Yep. A
and
page could have
components
multiple
can.
can have multiple bases. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But also there's something here. The foundation service on the client side is much more dumber than you think. Like it doesn't do
Mm,
much of the like your core business logic in here. Like in here, we basically in the back end, the core business logic basically goes and says, I want to be able to, validate that the date time is recent. If you're posting a post that doesn't have any content in it, I'm gonna freak out and throw a validation exception, right? But in here, in this particular scenario here, the foundation service here is just a facilitator between the back end and the front end, right? It's basically doing a mapping and doing a basic structural validation before you send it off through the API and pay for the trip all the way to the API, especially if you don't have very geo redundant distribution of your components based on the region. Your foundation service on the client will just do a quick check. Think of this as an airport, and this is another
yeah.
airport, and you're landing in that airport, and they're doing just a quick check, right? So, so there's that guy, and then this view service does something completely different. It maps these native, or sorry, these local models from the API into models that the UI needs. So it's very focused into making sure that the UI doesn't get data that it doesn't need. And that's really important.
Mm,
This is security baked in. So a lot of people do this. A lot of people go and say, oh, just let me send the entire payload, the entire request to the UI, right? And then let's let the UI kind of filter through. You know what I mean? So they'll send maybe a list of 20 students when the only student that they're looking for is just two students or one student, right? Go ahead. Mhm.
so it's the same thing as a DTO, right?
Very similar to the idea of DTO, yes.
Yeah.
But the the thing about DTO that I don't agree with, DTOs try to abstract away, they try to cut away audit fields, right? Like if you
Mm,
look at a DTO object, Let me tell you, this is probably something really interesting for so many people to hear because a lot of people came to me and said, Hassan, how come you don't do DTOs? We don't. In our API, the model that's coming in is exactly the model that gets persisted, right? There are some
Mm,
cases where that model comes in bigger and we split it across multiple foundation services. We will see that together. But why DTO is not a good idea? Let me tell you. So from a glance, in a happy world, all bunnies and rainbows out there, trusting your service to kind of persist in the date time and the user and all that kind of stuff is great on paper, right? But once you start doing some serious real world enterprise problems like doing data migrations and allowing your API to receive in data that's backdated, you can't trust your API to kind of stamp a recent date time because you're migrating historical data into the system, right? And this happens all the time, especially when you're doing patch migration and stuff like that. Now, some people would say to me, why don't you just go do it through the database? They just violated their own rule because if you go and migrate the data directly through the database, that means you're bypassing all the validation rules
yeah,
that you built. Then why are you using an API at all then? You know what I
yeah,
mean? See, this is the problem with DTOs is that it's trying to trim out an object. First of all, it creates a mapping hazard, right? Like people have to map back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then they go and say, oh, this mapping is so hazardous. Let me go and do what? Let me get auto mapper.
upper,
Let me get
yeah,
auto mapper. And now you have a third party NuGet library in the heart of your business logic. So if this guy stops supporting it, your entire system crumbles.
and don't get me started with special rulings with
And the
mapping.
special ruling, and then people go and say, no, I want to see one tiny, that's the thing about software, one tiny bad decision
Yeah,
could initiate a ripple endless waves of issues that are endless, and then people come in and look at the software and they say, "Man, this is full bar. This is screwed up beyond repair at this point in time. Let's start over." Right?
yeah.
And I have seen people do even things that are even scarier. Like I've seen some engineers would do things like, they say, "Okay, we don't want auto mapper, right? Let me use aspect oriented programming, which is in concepts it's a great concept, but what they basically do is that there's code that gets injected into your existing code at runtime. So the engineers don't even see the mapping part.
Oh wow.
At runtime, right? And things get and then some people say, okay, let's build middleware where this mapping happens, right? And I go and say, okay, how did you just drive that? Be like, oh, well, it's just mapping. What could possibly go wrong? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe the first name will end up being the last name, and the last name will end up being the middle name, right? So there's all these. You'll see all these scenarios. I think DTO is a little bit. It needs a little bit of a revision, but I try to stay kind of pure in terms of contract. Here's an
Yeah,
API. Here's a database. Here's what really gets persistent in the database, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you're posting the right stuff, and I will validate. Like the API will say, I will validate if your data is good or not. I will validate. You're saying that you are Ricky, right? And you are sending your request and you're saying you are Ricky. I will look at your challenge, at your token, and I will challenge it and match it, with the created by, updated by. If it doesn't match, I'll throw validation exception. I'll just say, forbidden, something like this. So see how we're shifting the API from adding data to being just a channel to persist that data. That's it.
mm.
It's just a channel. I want to persist the data however I want to persist the data. Don't tell me, don't go add new things to my data, right? It's just I try to stay pure and simple. And like I said to you, Ricardo, there are some things that I subscribe to a different school of thought when it comes to building software, but I'm also stupid. I'm a simple-minded person, so it doesn't fit in my head. I can't explain it. Something has to
But
be really simple to fit in my head. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but this is what actually got me interested in this in the first place. I mean, I noticed all the libraries that you've been adding to the project are just basically ones that help us
Hmm.
for
Just
completing the
move forward a
standard.
little faster. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
not they're not libraries that are all dependent to that external factor. Which is why I was kind of curious your thoughts on DTO because I was bound to ask you at some point, but
You're only
yeah,
the 100th person to ask me about this, and I'm willing to answer it. I'm willing to answer it 1,000 times more. It's very unpopular opinion, I'll tell you that. You'll have
yeah,
some people laughing at you. Like you have some people coming in and saying, sometimes engineers will get a little proud of their opinions and they'll say, "No, why would you expose your audit data out there?" I'll be like, "I don't know. I'm building an API, a simple API to
yeah,
persist data." And they always stop at this point when I say, "What do you do with migrations?" They'd be like, then we go add the data in the database. I'm like, you made a mistake. You just bypassed your API validations. And then people come to me and they say things like, well, then how do you bypass your own rules? This is where they come into my field, and I go and say, yeah, you can pass in a header file and security tokens, and you say this is a migration effort, and the data is still benefiting
mhm,
from your data validation. This is enterprise level. This is you building something that's serious, something that can, save people personal information, social security numbers, bank accounts, whatever you're saving out there, you can trust the API is doing its job and its job alone. Does that make sense?
definitely,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. We talked a lot. We said a lot of things. Now let's see what we can do. So we're gonna build let's see um um let's see if we can build a simple API today. So back to the map here, my friend. We're gonna be focusing on this sucker here today. This guy in the orange, right? That's the API broker. It's really simple, Ricardo. All what we really want to do, and this is going to be a really short, introduction, but it's going to be really great. All I really want to do is to build an API method that makes a call to the API controller and just brings it back. So let me show you what we have today in Taarafo Web, and hopefully you'll find this. By the way, just I want to let you know something, this is really important. You know, the goal while I am publishing these things, these videos online and all that kind of stuff, and I'm hoping you listening to this, me saying this right now, that's already mission complete. That's me basically saying I've already done my job, right? Now, anybody else who listens to this video and benefits from it and asks you questions and all that kind of stuff, that's just an added bonus. That's just me going and saying, hey, if you want me to do a special series with you, I'll do it again. But if Ricardo is already aware of this and he reached to that level, then I think we're good. I already did my part. I already taught someone something new today. That's my part. Okay. So let's go ahead and see what we have here, my friend, and see if we can move forward with this. Let's see. Ricardo. Okay, let's go here. Ricardo, you're gonna have to teach me Spanish sometimes. Okay? Because I want to be able to speak to people who speak Spanish. Do you know that Spanish is the third most spoken language in the world? Did you know that? I think it
Yep.
is. I think. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. You gotta teach me that so I can make YouTube videos in Spanish. What do you think about that? How do I go? I say, hola, ¿cómo está? I will teach you programming today. Let's see, man.
Te enseñaré a programar.
Yes, that. What you just say it again. I want to say
Yeah.
that. What do you say?
Te enseñaré a programar.
Diseñaré programen. Is that?
Yes.
I can I
Yeah.
can I can pull it off as someone who knows how to speak Spanish. That would be great. Anyway, thank you for indulging my humor. I appreciate you. Okay, so let's go here and let's see what we have. So there's already people that already reached out here and built some API brokers. So let me just walk you through this so you understand what's going on. Hear me out, my friend. Every broker, let's just forget about this. Every broker should own its own configuration. Okay?
Yeah.
What that basically means, it means that you shouldn't have your broker's brains all over the place. You'll see some people at startups, yes, configuring their clients. That's really
Yeah.
bad. Every broker should have all the smarts about how to communicate with either a database or an API or whatever they're communicating with. Could be
Yeah.
a queue, it could be a SendGrid, doesn't matter. You
Mhm.
shouldn't let your configurations go all the way out here at the startup. Like you'll see some people do that stuff. Please don't do that. That's really bad. Okay. So that's one thing. So all I know is that I'm initializing API broker. What it's doing underneath, I don't know. If I want to know what's going underneath, I will go there. If I don't, if I'm happy, like when you buy a car, you don't necessarily know how the car works, but you know it's a car. And you know that it takes you from point A to point B, right? It does
Happy path.
happy path, right? Just it's
Happy
just
path. Yeah.
sweet and simple, right?
Yeah.
Some people, like imagine if every time you're trying to buy a car, the engine and the cords and everything is out there on display. Nobody's gonna buy that. Be like, I don't want that. I'm not Batman. I don't want to buy that car, right? I don't want to do that, right? So this is the same thing. This is the API broker. So let's just go here. So I initialize two things here that I really want you to care about. There's something called HTTP client. This HTTP client, it basically initializes an instance of an abstract class called HTTP client. That's the first one I care about. Okay. And then the second one is this API broker right here, this guy right here. Okay. And don't worry, I'm spinning up a couple of other projects. You will actually get a chance to write these things by hand because I could tell you every day, unless you do it by hand, it doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that happen once per project and then it's gone. You just
Yeah.
gonna have to go back and see how it's working. But it's also changing in and of itself. So you see how I'm doing add logging in here that automatically initializes iLogger? It's
Yep.
exactly the same thing in here. Like if you hover over this one, it will say this will give you the HTTP client factory and it will initialize that HTTP client. Why do I need that, Ricardo? Because this HTTP client is where all the magic happens. This is the core component that allows me to go and execute calls to APIs, OData endpoints, WSA, whatever you're doing, right? Okay, let's go into this API broker from the top. Of course, the interface itself is empty because we don't have anything exposed in here. But there is a partial interface that has some magic in it. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's go to this guy. So check this out. The thing that I said add HTTP client, this is this guy right here. Do you see? So I'm injecting it in the constructor of my API broker.
Mm.
So this guy becomes available because I did this part in here. So far, so good. This is
Yeah.
dependency injection. Very straightforward. Okay, now bear with me. What about this guy? This I configuration guy. This guy is also initialized. If you go back to startup CS, look at it. It's right here. It's already injected in here. Where is this guy coming from, by the way? Since startup, I thought startup is the beginning of everything,
Actually,
right?
program, I believe.
Program. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
This guy is coming from here. See,
Hmm.
configuration web host defaults, and it's passing this guy in here, and this guy needs our code drop, by the way. This can be a one-liner. Anyway, we'll clean that up later. This was Evan. Evan initialized this project. Very, very smart guy. He was interning with me, and he's a very good guy. Okay, so there's this guy. So let's go back here. See, you don't see the code anymore. You see people, right? Which is the fun thing about software. Okay, so hear me out. So I got the configuration, so I know which API to call, which endpoint to call, and I got the clients to actually execute the call. So these are the two things, right?
Hmm.
Now, actually building out of the HTTP client, the actual communications and doing the serialization is a lot of work. If you have to do that every time you build an API broker, it's just a lot of redundant, really boring work that you don't have to do. And the most important thing about this is that when you get an error code, right? You need to handle it as an exception, but it doesn't give you an exception, right? It gives you failed when you do verify or verify code succeeded or something, and it then throws a very generic something called HTTP response exception. That's all. That's really a bad idea, right? Because I want to be able to integrate with my API, and if anything wrong happens, I get a meaningful exception that makes sense to me. So if I get a bad request, I should receive a bad request exception. If I get a bad gateway, if I get internal server error, I should get that exception as an exception. I shouldn't
Yeah.
have to do all that mapping. So let me tell you a little story. Have you ever heard of RESTful Sense? Have you ever heard of this library?
I believe so. I know you have like a for every exception, there's like a documentation link for
That's
every
that's
ever code.
That's literally what this is, my friend. I
Yeah,
went and I said, okay, let me fix this. I'm gonna go and build this library called RESTful Sense, and I'm gonna make it
yeah,
open source for the world. It took a lot of work. You have no idea. It took an ugly amount of effort. And I went and said, okay, every single request, I'm gonna map it to an exception that makes sense. That's why it's called RESTful Sense. Like it makes sense, RESTful operation that makes sense, right? Uh, so bad request maps to this, unauthorized maps to this. So the engineers that are working with the API, they don't have to do any of this deserialization, serialization, handle exception, none of that. You don't have to do none of that anymore. Okay, so that's that part. And then there's another part in here that basically, remember when we were doing locked yesterday? And I said
yeah.
to you, oh yeah, you're gonna find locked in there. Natively, you don't, but I added it in here with a 423 error,
Fortune.
okay? And then very recently, I added something more to this, which is basically the documentation for these errors. So when you throw that error, it will send you to the standard documentation, the HTTP RESTful standard documentation. Just let me show you what that looks like. If you go to the controllers area in here, you'll notice this. Now, when we throw it, look, this is all these methods. Look at this. Every single error has a link in it. And if you go to that link like this, it'll take you exactly to the standard documentation for what it means. Like this is payment required. Every single one of them. That's a boatload of work, man. I can't,
Yeah.
and it's test driven, so you can't actually trust it. Like if you go back to the tests, you'll find no, this is not, I'm not joking around. This is actually a very test driven method. There it is, problem details. Check this out. Each and every one of them has its own tests.
Wow.
So that took days just, but I'll tell you this, I am more at peace with this because now I know that we have standardized the communication in a .NET platform between a client and a consumer. Okay? Are you good with this? There's still more to do, but I'll tell you, it's really fun, man. But anyway, so that's this version. This is what this is. Even this documentation is not doing it any good because there's this problem detail stuff that I'll talk to you about later. Okay. So back to the story of back to the story of the API broker. This is really all I want you to understand. Here's the thing, Ricardo. In this day and age, if you know how to execute and implement standardized, successful API communications, you're a king because you can talk to anything in the world, right? It's open-ended. So okay. So I took this HTTP client and I took this configuration and I passed it to something called Get API Client. Do you see that RESTful API Client factory?
Yeah.
That's RESTful Sense. That's RESTful Sense. And what it basically does, it goes and says, okay, buddy, give me your configuration. Let me map this configuration. Are you familiar with this mapping? So whatever is in the JSON configuration, I'm
Yeah.
mapping it to a hard-coded model. So now I don't
Yeah.
have to search through and okay. So I'm just saying, give me the URL. So I put in the base API base URL and I added this base URL to that HTTP client, which was injected, right? So that's number one. And then I initialize. This is all you have to do. Initialize RESTful Sense API factory with this client that has the base URL,
Mhm.
and you're done. Of course, we're gonna go into situations where we have to add in security tokens and all of these
Yeah.
little. It's very easy. It's very, very, very easy. I can't wait to show you all that stuff. It's magical. It's simple, right? But it'll be literally 2 lines of code in here. That's all that it is. Okay. But the world is not ready yet. I'm trying to kind of prepare people to kind of learn at least how to do the happy path before we start adding
Yeah.
security and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is the part where I initialize the guy that's gonna give me this easy functionality to serialize, deserialize, methods. I pass in the URL and it serializes the response, all done and done. See, now from now onwards, this guy is here is initialized as something called API client. And I'm wrapping this up. This is where the broker comes into play. I'm wrapping this up into something called get async, post async, put async, delete async. They're all generic. So
Yeah.
these are the CRUD operations, right?
Yeah.
CRUD operations, 2 R's there because there is a retrieval and retrieve by ID. CRUD operations, just like Cardi B or something. So anyway, so so here's the deal. So so this is what this is. CRUD operations crud. So this is what it is. We're basically going and saying, give me the get async, post, put, delete, sweet and simple, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This operation that you and I want to execute, let me show you an example. So remember how in the storage broker we break into partial classes per entity?
Yeah.
You remember how when we say post, there's partial post, and then we're gonna add in there a bunch of other. You
Mhm.
probably see this on OSSS a lot, especially in the storage
Yeah.
broker. We broke off in here into these posts, and we basically said, give me the relative URL. This guy should be an uppercase R because it's a constant. See, your eye is already catching the. But anyway, so relative URL, right? API post, and in here I'm saying get all posts, and in here I'm saying post async, right? We're posting a post. And all I'm doing, I'm giving it the relative URL, I'm saying post, and that's it. I don't have to worry about anything else. RESTful Sense is already taking care of the serialization, deserialization, all that craziness. Okay?
Okay.
Now, of course, you have to kind of initialize, right, interfaces and then satisfy these. Why do we need the interface methods? Do you know why? Why do we need these interface methods? What's the point of it?
Um, if you can reutilize it for others, abstraction or implementations of other classes.
That's one part. And also we can
Yeah.
mock this guy. I want to mock this
Oh yeah.
dependency.
That
Right?
definitely.
So I don't have an interface with methods. It's not going to show up. You know what I mean? Okay, time to go to your side, my friend.
All right.
And you're going to write based on everything that I've just said. You know, this is like one of these math problems. Have you ever seen one of these math problems where they say, John has 5 apples and Jane has 3 apples? What day did Michael wake up? So what hour did Michael wake? Something that's absolutely irrelevant. This is how I saw math problems when I was younger. You know, just
Wow. I,
anyways.
I already got lost with the apples, but
Yep. You know, 5 apples and 4 apples. Okay. By the way, just out of curiosity, are you actually a contributor on Taarafo Web?
I don't think so.
Let me
And
add you. Let me add you first, so we can work on the same branch. Otherwise, we won't be able to work on the same branch. So what's your is it Ricardo Cruz? Is that your name? What's your
yeah,
GitHub name?
I believe it's our crew's freelance.
Our Cruz Freelance.
Yeah.
Okay, I see you. I saw your. So there's our Cruz Freelance EG, and no, I'll add the one with your face on it. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now you
More
just need.
trustworthy.
Yeah, trust me. So go ahead and just accept this invitation and create a new branch. Clone that repository because now we're in a new repository, right? This is not
Yeah.
Taarafo core anymore.
Yeah. Let me just
Okay.
go to it should be still waiting for the invite.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the
Is it?
invite.
Yeah.
Let me see first. It's interesting. I can see it on my phone, but I don't see it on the web on the laptop. Let me just do it from the
Okay.
phone.
Give it a second there. Okay, here's the deal. Let me show it to you this time, and then next time we do other things because we're gonna do a lot of brokers together. Don't worry about that. What do you think about that idea?
Oh, definitely. I need points on brokers.
Yeah, we're gonna be doing a lot of brokers, a lot. So okay, as long as you have the appetite. Once you lose the appetite, normally when people come to me and they say, I want to learn software, right? I don't
Yeah.
want them, there is no prerequisite. The only prerequisite that I have is three things: the passion and the purpose and the person. So you have a purpose that you're chasing that's generating a passion, and you exist, you're present, right? What do I do with the passion and a purpose if there's no person? And what do I do with a person without a purpose? And what do I do with a person without a passion? So they have to have those three things. I don't care. I really, even when I work with teams, a lot of teams, like when I start working with new teams, this is really what I say to everyone. I don't care what you already know. I will work with you from scratch. There's no expectations. Let's work from the bottom to the top and see how far we can go. And I only give up on people when they give up on themselves. And so far, you've been doing just fine. You're showing up. You should see this guy that I'm working with, Mahdi. He wakes up at like 5 in the morning.
Oh, I
You
know.
know, yeah,
Uh,
that's something, right? That's you
yeah,
gotta
I respect the brother.
you
Yeah.
gotta give it to the kid. The kid is
Yeah.
good. He's all right. He's all right. And I really appreciate that. Reminds me a lot when I was younger. You gotta wake up early, go jump on the transportation, and just, get to college. Anyway,
Yeah.
he's young. He can do it. Okay, so so I'm just gonna create a branch here. I'm gonna say brokers and then posts and then delete by ID. Okay, so I just created a new branch here for a broker. And what am I going to do is that I'm going to go here and say, okay, this is Git, this post should go at the top, right? Because it's CRUD, right? And then in
Mhm.
here, I'm going to go and say value task, post, like this. And I'm going to say delete post by ID async, right? And all I need here is the post ID. So far, so good, right? It's just a very simple.
So we're still using the delete name convention since we're still using a broker, even though it's in on the client side, right?
Yeah, because see how it's saying post instead of
Yeah.
insert? Why is it saying post? Because it's talking to the API. Remember, these
Oh,
brokers speak
right,
the language of the neighboring technology.
right,
And
right.
and it's like, I call it like language DNA, right? There's actually a term for it. They call it, um, it's like a dialect. It's like a
Mm,
dialect. A dialect basically meaning that if I hide everything in here like this and you don't know where I'm at, and I just show you this piece here, you know where I'm at just by looking at the method. You say, "Oh yeah, that's in a broker." If I show you a method that says retrieve by ID, you'll be like, "Oh, that's a foundation service." If I show you a method that says something like, select by ID, you'll be like, oh, that's definitely a broker, a storage broker. See, by just hearing one word, your brain, because of the standard, you already identified the location, what it's doing, where it stands. Is it a back end, front end, all that kind of stuff. Okay, my friend. So this is delete post by ID because the API gives us a delete endpoint, right? Now we
yeah.
just need to implement it, right? So I'm just gonna go here and say, okay, let me move this guy up by one. Here we go.
You would think you would get the squiggly lines of the implementation on that one. I know it's because
For
you're
the
using the
constant,
partial.
yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
oh, you mean for the implementation? You'll find it here. It's
yeah,
usually in here, right?
yeah.
If I wait a little bit, this guy will error out and I'll say, hey, wait a second. But we're also using partial classes, so it's kind of confused. It's a little bit confused. Look at this guy. It will give me an error in here. It says, hey, you didn't
Uh,
implement that guy, right?
yeah.
Let's implement it. Ricardo, how do we implement a delete? I'm going to go here and say public, right? Async value task, and then post. And I'm going to
Yep.
say delete post by ID async. And here's a post ID, right? So far, so good. We're being really good. And then I don't even need that. I could just fat arrow that guy like this, and I can go and say, okay, buddy, here's what I need to do. I'm going to go down here and say await this dot delete async. This delete async is coming from where? From the wrapper that we put around RESTful synths, native. right? And then what am I expecting to come back? A post, right? So that's great. Here's a post. And then what do I need to pass in here? Here's where it gets really fun. I can go up in here and say, okay, I'm passing in the relative URL slash, right? And then the post ID like this.
Yeah.
It's just that, my friend. That's all. A very simple API broker. Very simple. Imagine, and I'm telling you this from experience, you'll have some 300 API endpoints for a large enterprise application. It'll take you literally 2 minutes. You don't have to think about these things anymore. Your brain is focused on the business logic, on the foundation, orchestration, all of that stuff. Okay, so let's go here and say brokers, and then delete post by ID. Here we go. And then let's go to GitHub. I love this site. It's fantastic. It's a great idea. You get to go and share, code with the world. By the way, GitHub, when it started as a social network for engineers or developers, right? It started like this, said let's socialize through code. And so far it's been doing just fine. And people get to know each other. I knew a lot of people through GitHub. I just put my stuff out there. People are looking around. These are the explorers, right? They're going around, sailing, seeing what's out there. Anyway, so here it is, my friend. So I have get all posts, delete by ID, and I just fixed the order in here. So post, get all post. Any questions about this at all? Anything you have at all about this?
I mean, I think everything has been straightforward because it's already been
The simplest
implemented
thing
in
in the
there.
world,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just
Okay.
use what's in there. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna merge this in, and tomorrow we're gonna do what?
I believe we'll be doing the foundation service.
Yeah, what are we gonna call that method? What do you think?
I believe it will be remove
Remove by ID, I think.
remove
We
post
just
by ID. Yeah.
and then we just create a view service that does exactly the same thing, says remove by ID. We don't even care if it returns an actual post or it maps it to a view. And then all we gotta do is just go and say, now I just need something on a component, just to visualize things for you since we have 5 minutes. If I go back here, i- this functionality that you and I are building right now, you're gonna love how it looks like at the very end. You'll feel like you built something worth its while. It's pretty cool. So basically, this would be a post. This is the timeline, right? So you have your timeline, right? And inside that timeline, you have a bunch of posts. Like you have this post in here, right? Some guy saying blah, 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 whatever they're saying. And then this guy too, and this guy too, right? And you are, here it comes interesting, security, right? And you are the poster of this post or an admin, right? And this guy is putting here, oh, I'm talking about let's talk politics and let's yell at each other for 3 hours, you know. And then there's a box in here, and that little box in here that you and I are going to design together. This box, if you click on it, it's like a hamburger menu. We call it hamburger menu,
Yeah.
and you click on that guy, it pops up that little dialogue here, like share, whatever. And then we're gonna add a little button on this dialogue. See how many little components, base components coming together, and this guy will say delete. As soon as they click on this, it just trickles all the way down to the API, validates, make sure everything is good, boom, the post disappear. And it will truly disappear. Not just, oh, let me just soft delete it and let's run, Analytica and okay, so that's basically how our system is gonna look like. Okay, it's gonna be a very simple. You post a post, timeline, click on that, delete. That's a full end-to-end feature, my friend. And hopefully, after you see that feature, you'd be interested to building more features with me because we want to show the world how this thing works. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a good idea?
Oh yeah. That's pretty
Okay.
cool.
Okay, I'm happy that you think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea too. Okay, but now since we're the ones that actually, since we're the ones actually, because they're going to be modify, right? They're going to be another action in here that says modify, like edit, right? See the
Mm-hmm.
UI now, the UI now doesn't say modify, it says edit.
That
See
is.
how See how every single thing has its own dialect, right?
Yeah.
So the UI is saying edit, right? The foundations are saying modify. The API is saying put,
But yeah.
and all the way down at the broker it says update. It's all the same thing, but they're speaking language within the. It's like going to a different town or a different country, and they're speaking
Hmm.
their own language. And yeah, of course I'm in Spain, where they're speaking Spanish. Oh, of course I'm Saudi Arabia, they're speaking Arabic. I'm in America, they're speaking God knows what. You know what I mean? Anyways, listen, man, it's been really fun talking to you today. Let's continue
Yeah.
our journey end to end. See, we're gonna do rounds together, right? We're gonna be start doing rounds together. We're gonna go end to end like this, back and forth. At some point in time, Ricardo, I will just be sitting in on a pairing session with you, and you will be just helping another person, just showing them these things. This is how I actually build teams in general. I basically teach someone the standard, sit down, focus with them, have them build everything, and then we start kind of spinning up and helping more and more people. This is the only way we can actually reset our software industry, because believe me, my friend, this is the whole reason why I built GitFile. Our industry is chaotic. It's really there's a lot of stuff in our industry. There's a lot of engineers that want to learn software, and they're coming, you see it in their eyes, they're coming into the industry so happy, so willing to learn, and then they get shut down with bugs and data. They just get shut down. All their dreams. Do you remember the first time you wrote a Hello World program? Do you remember how excited you were?
Visual Basic. Yeah.
A Visual Basic, right?
Yeah.
What was that? Dim x as
Yeah.
int. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So remember these days, and we were excited, and we said, "Oh, I'm gonna, build great software." And then you join the workforce, and then you get shut down with bugs and data fixes and things that are really, they're not really contributing to your growth in any way, shape, or form. No matter how much people try to sell you on that. I'm trying to revive that spark. I call it the spark, the spark of engineers. Someone that's really excited about the work that they do. I want people to feel excited to come to work every day and work on these things. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure as usual, and I look forward to working with you tomorrow and finishing up that feature. Let's finish it end to end. Let's finish it all the way in. And there's more and more projects that I'm spinning up on GitHub every other month. I just spinning up a new project. Some of it is useful, some of it we're just trying to train people and help people kind of learn software. And I hope you found this very useful, and I hope people find this actually productive. And I apologize for the long session. Anyway,
No,
anything?
it was very, very educational, and I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. Well, you guys, thank you so much for watching as usual. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, if you have any compliments for Ricardo right here, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section. And as usual, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in another video.